Namaste and welcome to Detours with me, Anuradha Goyal, where I talk to some very interesting personalities about journeys of all kinds. Today we are going to travel to the beautiful city of Amritsar with Gurmeet Rai ji. She is a conservation architect, someone who's done a lot of work in the space of heritage and building maps, actually, something that I envy about her. You know, she's been creating maps as the cities would have existed way back. Her latest book is called Amritsar, A City in Remembrance. And we are going to talk to her about Amritsar. Gurmeet, welcome to Detours.
Thank you so much.
So, Gurmeet, tell us what is the most fascinating thing about Amritsar? I mean, we know that it's the signature city of Punjab, the Indian Punjab, so to say. Everybody knows it from a traveler's perspective. But as somebody who studied the city, what is the most fascinating part of Amritsar?
You know, it's a very interesting question that you've asked this, that if you, as an architect or as a planner, if you were to look at the city of Amritsar, it's very unique from its planning perspective. You know, what we understand as medieval cities, as walled cities, normally one sees that in the center of the city is the palace or the fort of the king. But here, in the center of the city, is the Sarovar with Harmandir Sahib in it. And within Harmandir Sahib, right in the center of Harmandir Sahib, the building is the Guru Granth Sahib.
Right.
So the point is that if you were to understand Sikhism and you look at that entire, the way the what was introduced by the Sikh gurus, gurus, and the fact is that Guru Manu Granth. So the Guru being the most important, the Guru Granth Sahib being the most important aspect of the Sikh faith, is sitting right in the center of Harmandir Sahib, in the center of the city, which is a very, very unique concept.
But it is also something that actually takes us back to the ancient ancient plans of Indian cities, where we really did have temples and our spiritual heart in the middle of the city, and then the city emanated from that.
Yeah, but you know what happens is when you look at, which is absolutely right, that you know, if you were to look at the temple cities of the south,
yes,
you have the temples which is right in the center of the city. Now that comes from the perspective of the deity and you know the community rallying around the deity and so on. What happens in the case of Harmandir Sahib is that we are looking at a bhakti period faith, which stood for certain principles of certain values of equality, social inclusion, democratic way of existence, each person equitable kind of, you know, treatment.
So I would not get into the value judgment here, because we have not really studied this thing. But what I agree with you, that in medieval cities, this is almost an exception.
One is that, and secondly, what happens is that when you look at a particular faith that began in the 15th century,
right,
as a social movement, because I look at the Sikh faith also as a historical, as part of history. I don't look at it only as culture. I also see it as a student of anthropology, as a student of politics, as a student of geopolitical scenario of North India. I say, I mean, even if I look at it in a very objective way, and I see the compilation of the Guru Granth Sahib, which has the inclusion writings of the Sufi and the Bhakti saints and the Sikh gurus. So, you look at faith, spirituality, but you also look at politics, community, the society, social principles and all that.
Right, right.
So, which is all from the perspective of, so it's not just spirituality I'm talking about here. About development, the aspects of development we're all engaging with today.
Yes. So what I understand is that during the time when Amritsar took shape, we typically had cities built around fortifications or around palaces. And this was an exception which was built around the core of the faith, with the faith at the center. And that's around it, the city developed over a period of time.
In a way, you can, no, the thing is, rather, it's not so simple, actually.
Yes, I'm sure. So let's look at the timeline of Amritsar then. Where does Amritsar begin? If we start from wherever we know about it.
Yeah. So the founding of the city had with Guru Ramdas, the fourth Guru, who was asked by Guru Amar Das to his father-in-law. Guru Amar Das was in the town of Goindwal, which is on the banks of River Beas, and in the same Amritsar district. And he was asked to go to this particular place. This place was north of the Uttrapath, the imperial highway at that point, the Badshai Sarak, because the Mughals were ruling. So you got talking about the times of Akbar in Lahore. And so there was the city of Agra, and there was the medieval city of Agra, and then the medieval city of Lahore. And in the middle of it, you had this the Northern Highway, which was the Badshai Sarak, the imperial highway, which is the precursor to which was the Uttrapath, the ancient highway. Yeah. Right. Now, Amritsar, at that point, the place came to be known as Ramdaspur, with Guru Ramdas founding it. And there are multiple views on the matter, whether they purchased the land or whether it was given it to him as a grant by Akbar. He purchased it, and Akbar made it into a revenue-free, tax-free, place. And Guru Ramdas also brought in 52 different artisans, groups, guilds to come and settle there in the making of the city. And he did not, and this was a natural water body during his time. And now those artisans who came in were all, that led to, you can imagine now, even in terms of city building and development, even today, if you were to see that, Lahore was so close, and it was an important trading city. It was a political capital. So at that point, to try and develop a city, a town, a settlement, right, so close to a very important, thriving trading center and a political headquarter, it's a very interesting thing to examine that, typically such a settlement would not grow.
Right. Do we know where did these artisans came from? Because that's very interesting that in the building of the city, you also have a culmination of artisans from different places.
Yeah. So I'm not familiar with that. Okay. That's where they came from. But at that point, actually, they could have been from anywhere, because if you to look at the times of Guru Amar Das had set up manjis across, in a very large geographical area in terms of, the way the faith was growing during Guru Amar Das's time. Now, if Guru Ramdas is setting up a settlement, I would imagine wherever the manjis were, where the outreach, the faith and the philosophy was being, spread in the larger geographical area, I would imagine the artisans would also come from that particular geographical area as well. It'll have to my mind, would be believers,
right,
and the followers, and people to whom this appealed, that particular philosophy appealed. So I guess if one were to map where were those 21 manjis that Guru Ramdas established, one would probably get a larger understanding of the larger geographical area from where these may have come.
Right.
And then after Guru Ramdas was Guru Arjan Dev, his son. who actually went onto doing the brick lining, doing the steps which form of Harmandir Sahib, the Sarovar, it was called Ramdas Sarovar. So if you were to look at this image and you see the edge here, this edge
Right.
today, of course, has got marble and all that, but it follows the same profile as what would have been done by Guru Arjan Dev at that point. And he is the one who kind of conceptualized building of the shrine right in the center of the Sarovar with this causeway, which kind of connected. So, what I do share in the book is also what could have been the references for him and the inspiration for him, or what would have to inspire to for the form, the architecture of the place, because no document or maps or drawings exist from that period, which give you the exact architecture of the place.
Gurmeet, before I ask you to show us some of your lovely maps, I want to know, do we know of anything that pre-exists the building of Harmandir Sahib in this area region? Any ancient places that we know of?
The only other references I would have, like for instance, there are about 5 sarovars in Harmandir, in what is within.
Now the city limits of Amritsar.
So there may have been several of these water bodies in this area. There's Santosh,
Okay.
Vivek Sir, Ram Sir. There's also Durgyana temple, and then there's also Sarovar there. So there may have been multiple water bodies.
Okay. What about Ram Tirath, which is supposed to
Yeah,
be the Valmiki Ashram as per some
yeah, that
people?
is what I was going to talk about. This area, this region definitely has a very strong association with the two children of Lord Ram. If you were to say, like Kasur in Pakistan,
Right.
very close to Lahore, gets its name from Kush, and Lahore is known to get its name from love.
Love. Right.
And very close to Amritsar is a place called Ram Tirath, which is supposed to be the place where Valmiki Ashram was, where the two children were born. So this particular region has a very interesting sacred geography, which goes into the story of Love Kush and the Valmiki Ashram, and later to much later into the 15th century and the 16th century with the development of Ramdaspur, which then becomes Amritsar.
Which is very interesting because the way you have put it, it also brings out the fact that Amritsar really has never been a political capital per se. It has, but still it has emerged out to be this most revered city.
See,
Most other olden cities at some point in time they have remained a political capital uh, for some period of time at least.
no, but then there are a couple of things here. One, of course, is when you're talking about Sikhism. This is somebody very senior, who mentioned this to me in the faith, who said that, look, when you hear the narratives of the 10 Sikh gurus, like Guru Hargobind is the one who started this, who introduced the Miri part of the Sikh faith. So before that, till Guru Arjan Dev, it was only Piri. And this Miri and Piri and the Akal Takht, and the fact that the coexistence, non-duality, this concept was something which Guru Hargobind introduced, and he is referred to as a Deen Duniya Ka Padshah, as and he actually used the symbols of the Mughal throne, of the Mughal, the Chor, the Chandni, Kalgi. All of these were the symbols of royalty, which defied the Mughal symbols of by adopting those symbols. But it's very important that people don't know that he fought, I forget the number of battles with the Mughal forces, like at Sri Hargobindpur, because the restoration of a mosque built by him at Sri Hargobindpur in Gurdaspur district, that he actually won all of those battles. Now, when the Sikh Gurus, when Guru Hargobind was having these battles and fighting for Gobind Singh as well, they were not fighting for any political boundaries. So there's no demarcation in history that with the Sikh Gurus, when they were in confrontation of the Mughal ways of tyranny or whatever you may call it, they never, if they won a battle, it doesn't mean that they kind of got a political boundary, a political piece of land. So their battles were never fought for property or land or wealth. Always battles against a certain principle. So when you look at Amritsar, he established the Akal Takht. He established the throne of the eternal. But he did not say that this is the political boundary of Guru Hargobind that he ruled.
Right. And also Lahore was very close to it, which is where the seat of power was.
So subsequently, when so I'm separating, even in my book, in my first chapter, when I talk about the city and the sacred site of Sri Harmandir Sahib, I actually separate the two. I separate the evolution of the faith and its manifestation in physical forms like the sarovar, the shrine, growth of a settlement.
Show us some pictures now. You have some lovely pictures.
Actually, this particular presentation doesn't really what we're talking about. I'll come to a bit later. Like here, what I've tried to do here is that, let me complete that thought.
Yes.
So the Guru period development of Amritsar is very different. It's a place of the people. And what is an important one is this particular image of in the 19th century, a drawing in the 19th century, which talks about, there is an artist's impression of Guru Arjan Dev, though he did not sit with a Kalgi and all of that, and sitting with his people sitting around him, his followers of the faith and the discourse that's happening here with tented thing. And then you have another tented space where there's the kitchen, the langar.
Langar.
And then you have another place where people are making, breaking the earth, creating the right material for making bricks, and you see the firing of the bricks happening here. Maybe some wood coming here, and the construction. All of this construction of Harmandir Sahib is happening as an act of seva.
Right.
So basically, the Guru period being very different from when Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the 18th century missile period, and then at the time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, when Amritsar becomes a political capital, becomes the summer capital of Maharaja Ranjit Singh.
Right.
Whereas Lahore is his winter capital.
Right.
You call it a summer capital. I don't think Amritsar was so cool that it
I know.
But clearly, because it was such an important site as a spiritual center, that it became important for him to, that it was important for him to be here. And of course, the fort as well. There was an earlier fort. So when one comes into the 18th century and the 19th century history, you do see that, like, how Punjab looked like. And when I say Punjab, I'm talking about the land of the 5 rivers. I'm not talking about the administrative or the political boundaries of Punjab today.
Right.
So what came under the various missile chiefs, the different political groups or chieftains, the land that they had, under which they control. Now, that is when political boundaries come under, administrative boundaries come under the different missile chiefs, it becomes property. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh comes in later, in the early part of the 19th century, when he kind of consolidates all of them into the Sikh kingdom. Most of them, more powerful ones, also had they also had a territory within Amritsar.
Okay.
These katras, which are like mohallas, were independent little units which had residential, commercial, production areas and so on, which all of these little mohallas called the katras were located around Harmandir Sahib. And each
Okay.
of these chieftains and their groups of people, because see, there was a rural hinterland which they governed, and they had corresponding space, administrative space around Harmandir Sahib, and then they also had a bunga. Bunga was like a ghat, like I mean, not literally like dividing the steps of Harmandir Sahib, but they were like mansions, they were fortified mansions which were built on the periphery of Harmandir Sahib, where these sardars used to come. So
Do they still exist, these bungas?
only one of them exists, the Ramgarhia Bunga, the one with the two towers.
Okay.
So, because the others were demolished when the parikrama was being widened in the early
Okay.
of the 20th century. So it was very sadly that those were lost.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so this Ramgarhia Bunga still exists. And so these chieftains, and I would imagine, they're not just the chieftains, but people from those administrative areas, under, like if you think of the Aluwalias
Mm-hmm.
and or Ramgarhias, if they had a like the Aluwalia, the Kanhaiya missile. Now the Kanhaiya missile kind of had Batala and all of this area.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the Maharani Sadakaur was, the mother-in-law of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Now, their territory. So they would have, I'm just kind of illustrating a point. So they would have a corresponding administrative area within Amritsar.
Yeah. So it's like having a small space for every community that kind of belongs to the faith, having a small piece of that, having a small footprint in that place, something like that.
Actually, it would be interesting to see that what was the relationship. Now, if you think of it, these are rural hinterlands, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And Amritsar became a very important trading center. See, all pilgrimage areas became trading centers. Like,
Yes.
if one were to look at Haridwar, this particular drawing actually shows Haridwar. In fact, I'd gone to Haridwar. I was quite surprised that I was walking along the river, and on the eastern bank and on the western bank, I saw a lot of mansions, and these were mansions of the traders.
Yes. Yes.
And there are no temples.
Right.
Because what would happen? Pilgrims would come from everywhere, and when they would come on pilgrimage, they're coming on foot, they're coming on relatively slow means of commuting. So they come to these settlements, and when they come, and the pilgrimage wouldn't be कि अभी सुबह जा रहे हैं, शाम को वापस आ रहे हैं, It would mean they'll come there, they'll hang around there. It takes a lot of time to get there. And if they are producers of something, suppose a craft or a crop or something, they will bring it there, and they also have to take care of their needs. So there would be some barter system, or sell something and purchase something. And they would survive, and then they would go back to their hometown or home village and then do further trading,
Right.
So pilgrimage places actually became important trading centers. So Amritsar became a very important trading center because of the pilgrimage.
Right.
And that's one of the factors.
And also the fact that it's not too far from the GT road, so to say.
No, I don't think that would make a difference.
No?
That's not how it works. In fact, the road develops because of those centers of attraction.
Okay.
So then they are mutually supporting. The road then supports a settlement, and the settlement supports the development of the road further.
Right.
So then it becomes a mutually supporting kind of ecosystem.
Right.
So Amritsar becomes an important trading center, because you did ask this question earlier before we got onto this formal conversation, that why does Amritsar does not have an industry, but then it's a very important trading center. Why? Because trade means dialogue between people, a transaction between people who are coming to Amritsar for a particular reason. I would say pilgrimage here.
Right.
Anybody who wanted to sell their ware would also come here and want to sell here because they know the footfall is here.
Right.
How That's what I was trying to explain to you.
Right.
Where does a vendor go and sell even today?
Right.
How do melas happen at places of pilgrimage? Because that's where you
That's where the exchange happens.
captive audience is there, you know.
Right. Right.
So anyway, so
Yeah.
these medieval, so I would imagine that those katras are very interesting. You know, normally when you think of Chandigarh or you think of, you know, in terms of a modern sector, or if you think of mohallas, you think of a residential area with commercial on the periphery, that the principal
Right. Right.
be on the periphery, and the roads that go through the settlement, through that particular unit, would be secondary or tertiary streets, you know, access to homes and things. But in Amritsar, it's different. The Katras have commercial streets that go right through those administrative boundaries because trade was important. So primary reason was that those shop come workshops would be in those principal roads that cut across the settlement. Like next time when you go to Amritsar, you'll go to Katra Ahluwalia, which is right next to, you know, right in front of Harmandir Sahib, from the, you know, where the jalebi wala is and that and all
Right.
that.
Right. Right.
So that's Katra Ahluwalia, and all the tea trading and textile trading happens there. And then in the secondary and the tertiary streets are people living there and so on. Lots of temples and, you know, other sacred sites. And then you'll also have commercial streets on the periphery as well. But central one was very important because that was under the administrative control of a particular group of, you know, a subsect, either like the clan or whatever. And it would be gated,
Right.
you know. So anyway, so Amritsar gets its form like that over time, you know, from the times of the gurus to later. And I wouldn't say that, and then subsequently when Maharaja Ranjit Singh provides that stability, and it becomes a under his the Sikh Empire, when there's a, you know, as a kingdom trade, he had a very, very strong policy and for trade and commerce. In fact, you know, Amritsar becomes a center for shawls and all, you know, the pashminas and all from Kashmir. So all this wonderful craft that gets produced in Kashmir, actually Amritsar was their center place to sell because Kashmir was also part of the Sikh Empire. And from here, interestingly, they were sent to, you know, because they became very popular for all the Nawabs, you know, Lucknow and many of those kings in Rajputana and all of that. So all this material used to come into Amritsar, and from Amritsar it would go to different other places, you know, for trade.
Right.
So that's why the Kashmiri artisan, or the, even today, if you find in Gurdaspur and Amritsar area, people still do that embroidery. I think it's called it's a Sozni embroidery of Kashmir, which is that single thread work on shawls. So that is available even in Amritsar. In fact, I hear a lot of it even goes into Kashmir to sell to tourists, you know, as cheap shawls. But they are actually not Kashmiri; they are from Amritsar. You know?
Right. So, Gurmeet, let's talk about the events that define the timeline of Amritsar. I mean, we know of Jallianwala Bagh, which is the most popular one. Most of us have written essays about it in school time. But I'm sure there are a lot more events that we do not know about in the lifetime of Amritsar till now.
You know, I think the story of Amritsar, what I've tried to do in this book is basically explain all these multiple phenomena that go into making of a city, and with its multiple layers, you know. And here, of course, the faith being the sacred site of Harmandir Sahib being the most important, you know,
the core of it.
Yeah, the seed, you know, of
seed of
leading to the development of the settlement. Of course, the city is very young. We're talking about 500 years.
Right.
And but the city sees a lot of violence. It sees, because, you know, it sees that after the martyrdom of Guru Arjan Dev, and you know, the fact that Sikhism becomes a faith of the book, Earlier, it was probably perceived as, like the deras and small, when a particular philosophy is being explained and there are followers or listening, it looks like a little school of thought, but it is like a very informal presence. But the moment it gets institutionalized with a book, then it becomes like a religion, because the institutional forms start coming in. So the first most important institutionalizing the faith aspect that came into place, obviously the first was the way of life that what Guru Nanak Dev Ji and the earlier gurus put in, which is seva and langar and these elements. And when it gets compiled into the Granth, the Adi Granth by Guru Nanak Dev, and that is what leads to his martyrdom, because he's now formalized the faith into a faith of a book. And subsequently, it's Guru Hargobind who gives that identity of Miri and Piri to the Sikh faith, of responding to tyranny in the battlefield as well, after the martyrdom of his father. And then, of course, later Guru Gobind Singh, who creates the identity of the Khalsa to actively resist tyranny and oppression, and all aligned with the philosophy of Guru Nanak Dev Ji from the first founding to a very distinctive, form to the faith. This particular led to, the fact that we cannot forget that the history of Amritsar is closely linked with the history of the region. The region is the northwest frontier, which sees a lot of invasions coming in. And you had the Sikh community right sitting there for every invasion that came. See, till the colonizers came from the sea. Invasion into the Indian subcontinent came from the northwestern frontier. So Afghan invasions happened again and again, and that's what the Sikhs then resisted. And so the dynamics, of course, kept changing. And so when the community had to be taught a lesson, if we were to say it in that particular way, by the invaders, their vulnerability was Harmandir Sahib. So in the 18th century, the site of Harmandir Sahib was desecrated about 19 times by Ahmad Shah Abdali.
Which is not what many people know of.
Yeah, and to an extent, and very, very severe blows, to an extent of their descriptions. And these are historical descriptions.
And what is most important, Gurmeet, is that it was destroyed 19 times, which means it was built at least 20 times again.
No, we wouldn't say that. Okay. I wouldn't say that, because the severity of the damage would vary.
Yes, but it came back.
So the point is, it's not called destruction of the whole site, but it was desecrated. Right. The army coming in, the invading armies coming in, putting... But it's known that it was one time, I think it's, I know, the dates.
That's okay.
17...
In the 18th century sometime.
See, because 1763-64 is when the recovery starts. So around the 1760s is when there is a description of a very strong damage. When they say carcasses of cows were filled up in the Sarovar, and then Masarangar had dancing girls, inside the shrine, filled it up with gunpowder and blew up the place. Those kind of descriptions are there. Popular, I mean that it's accessible information. That is a damage which was very severe. And then happens the recovery of the site. And that happens in 1763 with Jassa Singh Ramgarhia, Jassa Singh Aluwalia, all these missile chieftains. They are the ones who then come together and then restore the entire site again.
and then we have dates of
Right.
restoration
Right. Right.
and reconstruction. Now, the question really is that to what extent does this happen, in terms of do they pull down what is damaged or they restore what fabric exists? But what we conclude is that they would have built it closest to the form that they would have found it, that was built by
Right.
Guru Arjan Dev.
Right.
My understanding is that the orientation, the spatial configuration, that remains the same. But in the third dimension, the architectural form kind of changes.
Right. Right.
In the sense that what is available at that point is that you could do, for instance, foliated arches, which is that Shahrani arch. In the earlier period during Guru Arjan Dev's time, if you look at it, it's, early Mughal period, that form was not built because
Right.
the artisans were not familiar with building the arches in a particular form.
Right.
So that would have, maybe the arches would have been simple and so on. But the renderings in the third dimension become far more, elaborate. And later during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, it becomes even further more ornate because the embellishments of gold and, frescoes and embedding precious stone mirror and all of that kind of gets introduced during his time. So what I'm saying is that, so of course, now coming to your question, that in terms of damage and recovery, you see that in the 18th century, you see that during first half of the 19th century is very stable because of Maharaja Ranjit Singh there. The second half is also fairly Harmandir Sahib. I mean, there are no of course, then the East India Company comes in after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and then the entire country comes, the entire India, I mean, it's not India at that point, but the entire Indian subcontinent comes under the British rule, under the crown in 1857. And there's a very complex history of the second half of the 19th century. In terms of building of new institutions, political thought developing, what does Amritsar mean to the people of Punjab, and what is geopolitical context of that time, and the relationship with, and what is the British colonial powers doing in terms of Punjab, because not to forget that the World War I happened in the early part of the 20th century, and a large part of the British India Army are Punjabis, and I'm not talking about Sikhs, I'm talking about Hindu, Muslim, and so it's a very complex narrative. And then, of course, soon after, when these people come back after the World War I is over, expecting to be rewarded for all the work that they did and the contribution they did, we have the Jallianwala Bagh massacre that happens. So this book also kind of shares a very, very important chapter on Jallianwala Bagh and positions it while you look at the book, when you read the book, you kind of understand Amritsar from its multiple dimensions of the development in the city, and politics and development, and people and community, people and their faith, and role of the arts, whether it's writing or poetry or painting or, trade, how everything is so interconnected. Because culture is not about buildings. The point I'm trying to make in this book is that when we're talking about cultural heritage, it cannot be separated from culture.
Yes.
And cultural heritage is a manifestation of culture, and culture is a way of a people.
Yes.
And it's a very, very complex matrix, and we need to understand cities as part of a civilizational phenomena. We don't have to see cities as roads and buildings and monuments.
Absolutely. You said it. In fact, if I look at, sometimes I look at cities and I think of what is the one thing that we need to learn from this particular city. And when I look at Amritsar, as I have known it or seen it, I always say this city has to teach us the value of Seva. That's the word that stands out for me for Amritsar. Seva is something that it needs to teach rest of us. What do you think?
Again, this is, I don't know, it's like and rather you're quizzing my mind quite interestingly, because, this is like a piece of textile, and you've got the warp and the weft and their patterns, it's actually, and if I start talking about a thread, there's some other thread that needs to be spoken.
I would say that the embroidery on the fabric of Amritsar is Seva.
It's like a Kani shawl, no.
Yeah.
So what I would say is that if one were to look at all these events, like you spoke about Jallianwala Bagh, then leading up to
partition,
in the freedom movement, and then the partition and that rupture, that textile in that fabric. But so when you look at the disruptions, and then you look at the recoveries and the conserving and restoring, what enables that conserving and restoring and moving forward is the spirit of Seva.
Yes.
Because that's where the community, then it's the resilience of the people that gets tested. And the point is and the fact that they are able to stand up and move forward is because their insides, their core is anchored in the principles of Seva. And
you put it very beautifully. You put it very, very beautifully.
So their reserves are that, So what happens is when they go through a moment of distress, they're able to rise.
Yeah.
Because
if I put it in simpler words, I would say if your heart is full of the Seva bhav, no matter how much people take out, you still keep the spirit of giving. You still have that bhav of giving.
Yeah. And, and the fact that every generation is, and it's not just a memory, it's a live wire. Why it's a live wire is because the site of Harmandir Sahib, Harmandir Sahib is anchored in Seva, in the spirit of the Seva.
Right.
Which was the foundational principles of the founding fathers, Guru Arjan Dev, from Guru Nanak Dev Ji subsequently. The fact that it's the ethic of life, which is the most pure form that continues in Harmandir Sahib. For every subsequent generation, it continues to be alive because they keep engaging with those principles. Every time you go to Harmandir Sahib, you see the same thing or you engage
with the same thing.
Yes. Even if you do it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days. And the moment it becomes part of your personal memory, it's like the body remembers.
Right.
To call upon that every time you're in your moment of distress.
Absolutely.
So the point is Harmandir Sahib being right in the center of Amritsar, and the fact that the entire community has rallied around. When I say community, I'm not talking about the Sikh community. I'm talking about the community of Amritsar, which is across all religions. When people of Amritsar, people of Punjab rally around that site and uphold those principles which were put in place by the founding fathers, which are the Guru Sahibs and all that, in their way of existence. So it's in the way they, in the sense martyrdom happened of the Gurus. Martyrdom didn't happen to the general or to a follower.
Right.
Because they stepped forward.
Right.
So they demonstrated each bit of it,
Right.
So,
right.
So that's what. And whether it is partition or any of these things. So basically what through the various essays, the 11 essays in the book, I begin with the historical narrative and then bring in essays by different people.
Right.
On different aspects. At how to read a city through the writers and poets, reading a city through events like partition, through events like Jallianwala Bagh, through monuments like the Gobindgarh Fort, the transformation of the Summer Palace of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So basically, what I'm doing is what it has been for me for engaging with Amritsar as a conservation architect, that I understood the city through these various aspects and I saw them all interconnected.
Right.
So I
Can you
tried to
quickly tell us
present,
about the popular writers and poets from Amritsar? Very, very quickly in a minute.
the people that have been mentioned in the book, and there are many more, and the list that we have in our book clearly does not do justice to all that are there. But clearly, Amritsar has had a very important, people like Nanak Singh, Bhairam Singh. Nanak Singh, people are familiar with his work on Khuni Baisakhi. He wrote about the event of 1919 of Jallianwala Bagh, which was then banned. He was a 20-year-old young man who kind of wrote. So Khuni Baisakhi, so Nanak Singh, Bhairam Singh, then Gurbaksh Singh, who set up Preetlari. Faiz Ahmed Faiz was in Amritsar for the longest, and he's supposed to have got his political ideologies and all that inspirations while he was teaching here in the Mao College. Amritsar. Sadat Manto, he was also from Amritsar. Now, there have been painters, writers, poets, singers, musicians, the works, and a lot of
Right.
and very interestingly, you see them in the second half of the 19th century. And the very important architect, artisan, designer, Bhairam Singh, who was actually from Gurdaspur, but he did the Khalsa College in Amritsar, and he was working in Amritsar, where he got noticed by the deputy commissioner's wife because he restored her piano. So the story is about Bhairam Singh in Amritsar. And then, of course, he goes on to becoming the first Indian principal of the Mayo College of Art in Lahore and designs the Khalsa College in Amritsar. So all these people, so there's an essay on them as well. And how do you read that? But what does it say about that particular period, what are these writers, poets doing? And subsequently, and then of course, how do you read a city? Through its monuments, through their transformation, and through an attempt to recover. But one thing which I have tried in the entire book, is each of the chapters not only tell you about the past, but also have something to say about the future.
Right.
Because, cities are a continuum. And to say this is all relevant in the past, but present, we don't get a direction from these values.
We have to define our future rooted in the past.
Yeah, so this is the attempt we are doing. I'm doing through the particular book. And every essay tells you what more can be done to move into the future.
Right. I'm definitely looking forward to read this book, Gurmeet. And I've seen the pictures and I've seen a lot of stuff and I've heard you. I'm definitely looking forward to this, and I hope this book inspires a lot more people to do similar books on other cities of India, because every city has so much history and so much layers to explore, and we've not really done justice to our spaces. And also very important point that you ended with is that, you look at the past, but you define your future based on that, or you carry forward that tradition in the design of your future. So thank you very much, Gurmeet, for taking out time to speak to us. And this was a wonderful conversation. And I am going to now look at Amritsar from a lot more angles. I'm going to explore where those artisans came from and, how did they create the fabric of the city. It'll be great to map them from those manjis to Amritsar. And I see a very, very great parallel with the city of Kashi, where also you see a footprint of every other community of Indian subcontinent in the city of Kashi. So I see that parallel, and you gave me that layer to explore. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anuradha. It was really delightful.
Thank you for joining us on Detours. You can also join us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Our handle is Inditales, INDITALES. See you soon.